Now, Pacific Central was actually Vancouver's 5th train station. The Canadian Pacific would build the first one along the waterfront in 1886. They would replace it in 1898 in the chateau format you see here, and then would sadly tear it down in 1915 once today's waterfront station opened in 1914, which I actually did a full video on in my Best Kept Secret series back over the summer if you are curious to learn more of a waterfront station. Now, despite the land being cleared specifically for the Canadian Northern Railway, it was the Great Northern Railway, an American railroad, that actually opened the first station on the False Creek Flats. And they opened their own station right here in 1916, next door to today's Pacific Central. But with the collapse of the United States passenger rail service in the 1950s, it hit them hard. And the Great Northern would close the station in 1962, moving all service over to today's Pacific Central and renting track space from CN. They offered to sell the station for $1 to the city to preserve it as a museum. The city declined and would then demolish it in 1965, where the land would sit empty pretty much up until 2022 with the construction of the new St. Paul's Hospital, which I'll cover more on a little bit later. Now, the great decline of passenger rail in Canada reached its peak in the late 1970s when the Pierre Trudeau government formed Via Rail Canada to absorb all CP and CN passenger service. And by 1979, Via would move all of the Canadian Pacific passenger routes from Canadian Pacific stations, like Waterfront Station here in Vancouver, over to CN stations, like Pacific Central. And Via would continue leasing the station from CN, but with the massive budget cuts of January of 1990, slashing Via's service by almost 60%, including the entire axing of the southern route to Banff and Calgary, despite having almost 500% more ridership along that route. I've covered it before. Leaving the politicians in charge of the trains, what could ever possibly go wrong? But Via would finalize a deal with CN to buy the station, while CN would retain ownership of the tracks. And in 1992, the station was renovated to combine bus and rail service and also be renamed. And Via Rail would have a contest for locals to pick the name. Rumor has it, the president hated all the submissions, so he did enter Pacific Central himself and chose it, which is actually kind of hilarious. But the city would not allow Via Rail to remove the classic neon CN sign, but they would approve replacing it with a new neon sign in the same colors and same font, reflecting the name change. And that sign would go up and has stood ever since December of 1994. And fast forward to today, Pacific Central did go through an exterior restoration in 2020, but outside of that, it looks almost perfectly preserved. And when you step inside the great station, this is pretty much the exact same way that it's been since opening day of 1919. And yes, obviously there was no A&W back then, but the center-hung station clock has lost its departure board as daily trains and 14 Canadian departures a week have been lost in favor of just 2 Via Rail departures weekly, both to the northern route. This was a clip for a full-length show. If you want to watch the full episode of the clip you just saw, click right here, you get the full show, and they go up live every single Sunday. If you want more clips of what you just saw, click right here, you can see the next great hit.